you have your Bible, I invite you to open it to John chapter number 12. The Gospel of John, chapter number 12. We have been studying through the Gospel of John for several months now. We're going to continue to do so. We titled our study, Come and See. And the reason behind that is because of the invitation that Jesus issued to those early disciples where he invited them to come and see, investigate his life, and to follow after. And that's our goal. As we're studying through this book, we want to look at the life of Jesus, we want to see how it impacts us, and we want to follow after him. And so if you have your Bible, open it to John chapter number 12. That's where we find ourselves this morning. As you're turning there, I want you to think about something. When I was a kid, I loved to play sports. I don't know if that was your story when you were a kid, but that was true for me. I played about every sport that was available for me to play in. And in all of those sports, there were typically incredible athletes that I always wanted to be like. Now, you may not resonate on the sports world, but I bet there are certain things in your life that you've always wanted to do or accomplish, and because of that, you have probably looked to somebody who modeled that well, somebody who was successful, somebody that you wanted to be like. In football, for me, I always wanted to be like primetime Deion Sanders. Anybody else? Primetime? Just me? Hey, Brian Lark, I appreciate that. Okay, two of us thought Deion was great. Anyway, growing up, I had a Cowboys jersey. I always wore number 21. I wanted to be just like Deion Sanders. In baseball, it was Ken Griffey Jr. Man, that guy was incredible. Listen, I wanted to play center field like Griffey. I wanted to swing like Griffey. I wanted to wear number 24 like Griffey. Everything for me when it came to baseball was how can I be as good as Ken Griffey Jr. In tennis, man, I had so many great American tennis players that I wanted to be like. Pete Sampras, if I could just win the next major like Pete Sampras. Andre Agassi, he wasn't super tall. He's kind of a stocky build. He was bald. I thought, hey, this is exactly who I can resonate with on the tennis court, right? So I was like, man, maybe I could be the next Andre Agassi. But really, here's the truth. There was one particular athlete that every kid that I knew when I was growing up wanted to be just like. In fact, I want to remind you of this guy from a commercial from several years back. Here's the commercial.
Sometimes I dream that he is me. You got to see that's how I dream to be.
I dream I move,
I dream I groove.
like Mike. If I could be like Mike.
Oh, if I could be like Mike.
Like Mike. If I could be like Mike.
Be like Mike.
Be like Mike. Be like Mike.
Yeah, I try. Just need to fly.
Just one day if I could be that way. I dream I move.
Oh, I move.
I dream I groove like Mike. If I could be like Mike.
I'm gonna be like
Like Mike.
Mike.
If I could be like Mike.
Be like Mike. Like Mike. If I could be like Mike.
All right, so for all younger ones out there, they call that standard def. Y'all may not have known that TV used to look like that, but that's how the quality used to be. Hey, listen, this is a guy by the name of Michael Jordan. Anybody ever heard of him? Yeah, like listen, when it came to basketball, I don't care where you were from. I don't care how much money you had. I don't care how good you were, right? Like if you were going to be like anybody when it came to basketball, you wanted to be just like Mike. Listen, that was my story too. I wanted Jordan shoes. I wanted my tongue to hang out as I drove to the hoop. I wanted to shrug my shoulders after hitting the game winner. I wanted to fly through the air like Michael Jordan. In fact, I believed I could fly. Listen, none of those things ever happened, by the way. But listen, I wanted to be like Mike. Now, I know that you don't care about my childhood heroes or the athletes that I wanted to be like, nor is that really my point this morning. I only bring up this conversation because all of us connect on some level with wanting to be like someone who has been the best. All of us have examples that we want to model certain parts of our lives after, and this goes, by the way, well beyond sports. Now listen, I'm not endorsing any lifestyles of any of these athletes. I don't know what all they've done or haven't done, but when it came to on the field, field, on the court, when it came to athletic ability, listen, I wanted to be like them. In fact, if you were to go into a bookstore, you can find countless of books to be read about people who have been at the top of their field. You want to know why those books sell so well? Because people want to know what they did to get to where they are. Bottom line, here it is, good examples produce good lessons. Like that's true for us. We look to good examples when we want to see how to model our lives, when we want to see what we can do good, when we want to be the best, we look at the lessons that we learn from good examples. Listen, nobody wants to model their lives after people at the bottom, right? Nobody wants to model their lives after someone who did the worst or someone who failed. No kid dreams about being the worst at something. Of course not. We want to model our lives after the people who meant the most. This is a little bit of a piggyback off of what we read at the end of John chapter 11 last week. If you remember, we talked about how bad examples can still produce good lessons. Well, if we believe that about bad examples, how much more would we believe that about good examples? And can I tell you something else? This isn't just true with all these little areas in our lives. This is true when it comes to Scripture. Listen, there are so many great examples in the Bible that teach us valuable, important, good lessons about what it looks like to follow after Jesus as he issues this invitation. Come and see, follow me, live like I live. As we think about wanting to be like Mike, how much more as a Christian should we want to be like Jesus? Of course we want to be. Well, what do we model that after? Who do we look at? Are there other people that have set some really good examples? Well, in fact, there are. And we run across a few of those in John chapter number 12. If you're looking at it with me, look at verse number 1. Let's begin at the beginning of the chapter. Here's what John writes. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Now let's pause for a moment because I want to set the scene for these examples that we're about to encounter. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus returns to Bethany. He was there previously when he was raising his best friend from the dead. Now, there are a couple of things that stand out in setting the scene for what we're about to read. First of all, the idea that it's Passover would automatically make us realize how many people are present in this moment. Passover would have meant that there were thousands upon thousands that were not normally in this area that are in this area because they're ready to celebrate the Passover. Now, what we know about the majority of those people who are in this area because of this celebration from the end of John chapter 11, here's what we know. They're looking for Jesus. And so you've got all these people who have come to Jerusalem. They are on their way, passing through Bethany and other places as they enter Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, and many of them have heard of the popularity and the fame of Jesus. So guess what? They want to see him. They want to witness a miracle. They want to meet this guy that everybody is talking about. So think about these crowds that are looking for Jesus. Also, I want you to notice that the last time Jesus was in Bethany, which, by the way, is in the previous chapter, in John chapter 11, he's raised his best friend from the dead. But because of all that he did in John chapter 11, we know that he fled for his life. As a matter of fact, at the end of John chapter 11, Jesus goes to a town called Ephraim, and the reason is because the Jewish leaders were making plans to put Jesus to death. Why go back to Bethany when you know they're looking for you so that they can kill you? Well, it's kind of the point at this point in the Gospel of John. You say, Danny, what do you mean? Well, chapters 1 through 11 have summed up over 3 years' worth of the ministry of Jesus. The majority of his life and ministry has already passed in the Gospel of John. But the rest of the book, which is nearly just as much as what we've already read that's left, has only to do not with the 3.5 years worth of ministry and life that we've seen from Jesus before this moment, but the rest of John, these next chapters that almost are the same as the entire part that we've already read, they only cover about a week of the life and ministry of Jesus. Why so much emphasis on this moment, going to Bethany, entering into Jerusalem, heading toward what is to come with the Passover celebration? Why so much attention? Well, we know why. Jesus is headed to the cross. Mission is about to be accomplished. And in this moment, in John chapter 12, the gospel is shifting. It's shifting from a much more public ministry to a much more private mentoring. Jesus is about to take those who are closest to him, those few followers and disciples that will continue on his ministry without him. He is preparing them for the cross. He is preparing them for a future where he will not be physically present. Now, there are two significant words that are used in this verse that prepare us for this particular shift. The first one is the word Passover. We know that Jesus is on his way to the cross to die as the perfect Passover lamb. They're going for the usual celebration that they would honor every single year. Jesus is going, even though they don't realize it, he's going to die on the cross. Rather than 6 days before Passover, this verse could be read as 6 days before the crucifixion. Everything's about to hinge on that moment. The second word is the word Bethany. Jesus going back to where the religious leaders are looking for him. Why in the world would he do that? Because he knows it won't be long before he willingly surrenders his life. And so it's all setting the stage for what will happen toward the end of the Gospel of John. And during this encounter in Bethany, this is where we discover these particular examples that point us to following Jesus. Let me show you those examples for a few moments right now. Here's example number one. Work like Martha. That's example number one. The first character that I want to bring out from this encounter in Bethany is a lady by the name of Martha. And what I want to highlight specifically is how well she served Jesus. Look at John chapter 12, verse 2. So they gave a dinner for him there. Once again, Jesus entering Bethany, preparing for the cross. And when he arrives, they, not exactly sure who that is, gave a dinner for Jesus. Now here's what we see. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Now, when we read this verse, as we think about the they that's throwing the dinner for Jesus, it seems to imply that this would be Martha and Mary and Lazarus, some friends of Jesus, a house in which he frequented plenty of times during his life and ministry. It would make sense that Jesus would be going there and that they would be hosting a dinner for him. However, just because Lazarus is there at the table with him, just because Martha is the one serving, doesn't necessarily prove that it's at their house. Matter of fact, a village dinner honoring and celebrating a guest might well draw in several families from that town to do the work. And the presence of Lazarus at any Bethany dinner designed to honor Jesus would scarcely be surprising. So it could be anybody who's hosting the dinner. Just because Mary and Martha and Lazarus are present doesn't mean it has to be at their house. And you say, Danny, why is this important? Well, because if you were to read Matthew and Mark, who also record Jesus at a dinner during the same time with several of the same pieces to the story, it's likely that they refer to the same dinner and give us some extra details about what's happening at this particular dinner. Now, could it be different dinners? Of course. Jesus was in Bethany plenty of times for several days. Surely he ate every night, I'm assuming. So it's possible that they were different, but the details are so similar, it leads us to believe that they're all recording the same account. If the dinners recorded by the gospel accounts are the same, then Jesus isn't at the home of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. According to Matthew's account and Mark's account, Jesus was at the home of a leper named Simon. So enter a new character into the scene. He apparently thinks enough about Jesus that he will host a dinner for him. He's a leper. That is significant. However, let me throw another wrench into the story. You ready? Luke also, in his gospel account, gives a similar moment. The details are a little different. The time, as far as when it's written in the gospel, is a little different. But there are so many similarities in the story that it's hard for us to completely overlook any connection between the two. If you hold to Luke's account as the same encounter, then here's what we discover. We discover that Simon is the host of the party. He happens to be a leper, but he also happens to be, you ready? A Pharisee. Now, this is pretty interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, how would a Pharisee have leprosy? when Pharisees observed such strict laws in order to avoid leprosy in the first place. Most of the Pharisees also, by the way, wanted nothing to do with Jesus. However, in John chapter 11, verse 45, we read it last week, we discovered that many of the religious leaders actually chose to follow Christ. So could this leper named Simon, who's hosting the party, could he be a Pharisee? Could he be a Pharisee that is also someone who's following Jesus? It's possible. Also, it's likely that Jesus would have healed this man of leprosy as he did so many others. In fact, if this is Simon, the leper Pharisee, who's been healed by Jesus, then it would make sense that he's hosting a dinner party in honor of the man who healed him from his greatest affliction. Also, if he had been a leper for whatever amount of time it was, he hasn't been able to be around anybody else, or he's kept it a secret. And so now, for the first time in a long time, he gets to host a dinner party where people get to come and celebrate Jesus. Regardless of where the dinner party is happening, I want you to notice a couple of things that are significant. The first one is the mention of Lazarus. Can I just tell you something? Nobody really cared about Lazarus before John chapter 11. You know why they care about him now? Because he was dead and got brought back to life, right? So now Lazarus is a big deal, okay? But there's another character that is very significant. Jesus is at a dinner at this guy's house. His friend Lazarus that he rose from the grave, he's right there with him. And then who else do we find? We find a lady by the name of Martha. And what is Martha doing? Well, John highlights it in a very small manner. He says, Martha served. Now, I want to wrap your mind around this because this isn't the only time that we read about Martha. As a matter of fact, the first time that we meet Martha, it's in Luke chapter 10, verse 38, and here's what she's doing. She is the hostess that is welcoming Jesus into her home. And so it's obvious that serving was second nature for Martha. If you keep reading in Luke chapter 10, you discover that Martha serves so hard that Jesus actually tells her to stop working so hard. Hey, Martha, listen, you're awesome. You are serving me way too much. How many of us are in jeopardy of Jesus saying, hey, you know what, Danny, you've worked too hard for me. I need you to take a break for a moment, right? So like there's a picture of the service of Martha. When we see Martha again in John chapter 11, after her brother dies, she's the very first one that goes out to meet Jesus. By the way, it is highlighted as she goes to meet Jesus, her sister Mary remained seated in the house. You would oftentimes find Mary doing nothing, but you would oftentimes find Martha doing everything. Then when we find Martha again here in John chapter 12, what is she doing? She's working again. She's serving. Listen, unlike Mary, you would never find Martha sitting. Instead, she was always serving. Can I just tell you something? I want to be known for how much I serve Jesus. I want to be known for having to be told to stop working and stop serving so hard for Jesus. I want to work like Martha. I do. I don't want to be found lazy. I don't want to be found as someone who reaps sparingly, sows sparingly. I don't want to be found apathetic. I want to be the one who's known for serving Jesus. In fact, can I just tell you something? Jesus has saved each of us, not so that we could sit. He saved us so that we could serve him. Listen to what the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Listen to these words. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all in everyone. We've all been gifted who are following after Jesus. Now watch this. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. You know what that means? It means you've been made on purpose for a purpose. It means that Jesus desires your service so much that he has gifted you and equipped you so that you could work for him. Friends, you have been issued into the labor force. You are now now a part of the army. You belong to Jesus. When's the last time you served him? When's the last time you worked for his name? When's the last time you found yourself like Martha? How are you working for Christ? How are you serving as a part of the body of Jesus? Friends, can I show you something? Example number one, I want to work like Martha. Can I show you example number two? You say, Danny, wow, that's a lot of work. I know, it's not always about work though. You know what? Example number two, enter Mary, who is very different from Martha. And it's not work like Mary as it is with Martha. No. It's worship like Mary. That's what I want to do. I want to worship Jesus the same way that Mary worshiped Jesus. You say, Danny, what do you mean? Well, look at John chapter 12, verse 3. We've read a little bit about Martha. We've seen Lazarus as a part of the story. Well, where's the other sibling? Well, we find her in verse number 3. It says, Mary, therefore, took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. That's pretty intense, right? And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. You know what that means? There wasn't a person in there who was not impacted by what Mary just did as she worshiped Jesus. Now, I think what's really fascinating to me is if we think about the connections between John's writing, Matthew and Mark's writing, and Luke's writing, and we put these details together, if we believe these are the same dinners. Now, that depends on how you translate what's happening in the events of the gospel accounts. But if you do think they're the same, then it's not surprising why we meet Mary last in the story. You say, Danny, why? Because it's very possible that Mary was not even invited to the dinner that was in honor of Jesus. Let me show you why. In Luke's gospel account, if we believe it records the same dinner as the others, Mary is not called Mary. Instead, she's described. Here's how Luke describes Mary: a woman of the city who was a sinner. That's the description if you think they're the same moment. Now, a Pharisee, even one who had been healed of leprosy or still had leprosy, would be prone to look down on others as the other self-righteous religious leaders did. Since he's hosting this dinner, it's very likely that Mary did not get an invitation. But can I just point something out? This is why this is extremely important to me. If this is the same account, can I just tell you how much more beautiful this moment of Mary's worship should be in our minds? Because not only would she not have been invited, not only would no one have wanted her there, not only all of those details, but it really shows us, if it wasn't apparent enough, that she doesn't care what anybody else thinks about her. All she cares about is worshiping Jesus. And you say, Danny, why is that significant? Because when is the last time that I didn't care or calculate or think about what anyone else is going to think about or what anyone else was going to do or what the standard might be? When was the last time I decided, you know what? I don't care what anybody else does or what anybody else counts as valuable or what anybody else is going to surrender or sacrifice to Jesus. I don't care. I'm not going to measure it up against anybody else. I'm going to lay everything I have at the feet of Jesus. When's the last time you didn't care what anybody else thought, but instead you simply wanted to worship? Listen, regardless of what Mary was doing before this moment, we find her doing what everyone else present should have been doing. What's she doing? Worshiping Jesus. Listen, from Matthew's account and Mark's account, here's what we learn. She takes an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment. She breaks it open and she pours it over Jesus's head. Now listen, the expense of the ointment would suggest one of two things. Either Mary's family was very wealthy, or this is a family heirloom passed down to her from generations. Also, she takes the ointment made from pure nard and she puts it on Jesus's feet. So it wasn't enough to anoint his head. No. She's got to take it a step further. She puts it on Jesus's feet. And based on the use of the word anointed and what Jesus will later say in the next few verses, John knows Jesus is being prepared for his future death. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But listen to me, friends. God's nostrils were filled with the fragrance of Mary's worship. I love this moment Nard was a liquid perfume, extremely expensive. It was the best that money could buy. Mary comes in, she pours it out in a lavish gesture, unexpected, generous, spontaneous, and wipes the feet of Jesus with her hair. Genuine worship. It's not intimidated by the stares or sneers of carnal minds. It has thought only for Jesus, and it leaves behind a fragrance that none can mistake and none can avoid. And a little of that fragrance is carried away by everybody who is in the presence of that worship. In this moment, Mary violated several cultural norms. First one's this: she was expected to be serving. Guess what? She wasn't. Secondly, touching the feet of another person was considered degrading. Combine that with wiping those feet with her hair, which, by the way, for a woman at this time was considered to be her glory and her honor. You combine those two things and you can strip Mary of any public dignity. Number three, a woman was never to take her hair down in public. There's strike number three. Strike number four, the expensive perfume she used on Jesus' feet was likely a treasure to be kept as her dowry. So in this moment, she reduced her prospects for a favorable marriage considerably. But you know what? She doesn't care about the cultural norms. She doesn't care what anybody else thinks. In this moment, Mary sacrificed all of her dignity to worship Jesus. King David speaks of this type of worship as he danced in the streets before God. As a matter of fact, listen to what 2 Samuel 6:22 says. David declares, "I will become even more undignified than this." He didn't care what anybody else thought. No, he just wanted to worship. Friends, I want to worship like Mary. But can I show you something? Not everybody present responded like Mary did. Look at verse 4. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. So as we look at this scenario, not everybody is looking at Jesus like Mary is looking like at Jesus. Listen, Judas is concerned with how much money could have been earned to help the poor, but we really know it has nothing to do with the poor. Now, Judas's credit, which, by the way, he doesn't deserve any, but credit, 300 denarii is the equivalent to a year's wage for a common worker. So imagine you have stored up your entire salary for a year, and you are now about to lay it at the feet of Jesus. We're talking about a lot of money. But John informs us that Judas wasn't really concerned about money for the poor. He's concerned about how much money could have been taken that he could have stolen for himself. John says he's a thief. Having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. John has the benefit of looking back on the life of Judas, and he's now aware of the schemes of Judas. But here's what's interesting. We could pick on Judas all day, and by the way, he merits all of those things. But Judas isn't the only one who responds differently than Mary. If you look at the other gospel accounts, here's what you discover that Simon says. Listen to what he says. "If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." You know what that tells us? Simon had a problem with what was happening as Mary worshiped Jesus. Here's what Matthew's account says. When the disciples saw it, not just Judas, when the disciples saw it, they were indignant. They were angry, saying, "Why this waste?" Matthew suggests that it wasn't just Judas, it was all of the disciples who were wondering why Mary is worshiping this way. Mark's account says that there were some who said to themselves, "Why the ointment wasted like that?" Once again, more than Judas has questions about the situation. Can I remind you of something? When genuine worship, the kind that says, "I don't care how much more undignified I have to be, Jesus is worth it all." When genuine worship, when someone lays it all down for Jesus, there are plenty of people who have questions about what you're doing. There are plenty of people who are confused and don't understand why you would sacrifice that, why you would serve that way, why you wouldn't do it for something else. Why would you do this for Jesus? Why would you do this for the church? There are plenty of people who are blown away when people genuinely in extreme ways, worship Jesus. Matter of fact, I read 2 different stories this past week of people who willingly chose to sell themselves into slavery so that they could win slaves to Jesus. And in one of those occasions, the brother of the man even fought and got the man's freedom back. And when he encountered his brother said, "No, go away. I willingly do this with my life so that people can come to know Christ." Listen, even to me, those stories are strange. Those stories are tough. But those stories, King David, all of those things remind me of Mary. It doesn't matter what I or anyone else thinks about their decision. They would worship Jesus till they died. Listen, where all others worry, Mary worships. Can I ask you something, friend? What does your worship of Jesus look like? Look at what Jesus says in this moment, by the way. Verse 7 of John chapter 12. Jesus said, he's looking at everybody who obviously disapproves, and he said, "Leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with me, but you do not always have me." Jesus quickly points to who is right in this moment. They needed to be more like Mary. Good examples produce good lessons. She was the only one focused on the right thing. Judas worried, what money could I have gained? Simon worried, why would Jesus let a woman touch his feet? That kind of lady. Disciples worried, why waste something so precious? Everyone there worried, how many lives could be changed by the money made from that expensive ointment? But not Mary. She wasn't worried. She was worshiping the one they would not always have with them. Now listen, I don't know all that Mary knew or understood about her act of worship that day. I don't know how much she realized about Jesus' death and burial and ultimate resurrection. I don't know what she knew. But I was reading this week and I came across a really interesting scenario that one commentator wrote. This is his thinking behind it, his interpretation of what was going through Mary's mind. Now listen, we can't know this, but I thought it was very challenging, and so I want to read it to you. In this particular case, he tells us that we need to try to put ourselves in Mary's position. She had listened to Jesus, had sat at his feet, and had learned from him. By the way, can I tell you something? Every time you see Martha, you know what she's doing? She's serving. You know what you see every time you find Mary? She's sitting at the feet of Jesus. Those are the 2 ways that you find those ladies. One serving, worked for Jesus. One sitting at his feet, worshiping Jesus. That's how you find them. So Mary, plenty of times, listened to Jesus, sat at his feet, learned from him. She had heard him talk about his death. She had heard him talk about his burial, and she had thought it through and realized that he was to die. And at some point, she, in preparation for that death, bought this rare and costly nard, and she hid it away. Then Lazarus, by the way, her only brother, then Lazarus died suddenly and unexpectedly, and spices were needed for his burial. Had Mary been tempted to lavish her treasure on her brother's remains? No, not one time does Mary say, I've got the ointment, I've got the spices, I've got the burial stuff for my brother. No, not one time. Why? Because she had gotten that for Jesus. It belonged to him. And then one day there was a resurrection. Jesus came to Bethany and raised her brother from the dead. Now we can imagine all the different times around the supper table, Martha looking at her brother Lazarus, looking at her sister Mary, and telling them and reminding them of what Jesus had told her. I am the resurrection and the life. And Mary hid all of that away in her heart. Then one day, the light went on in her soul. And Jesus said he was going to be crucified. He was going to be buried, and he was going to rise again. There was to be a resurrection like that of Lazarus. There had to be. He was the resurrection. Death would not be able to hold him. He had said he would rise on the 3rd day. And as for his body, it would need no spices. Maybe she thought about what David had prophesied about in Psalm chapter 16. Thou wilt not suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. And in her mind, here's what Mary thought. Jesus would not need the nard when he was buried after all. She said to herself, if he won't need it when he's buried, then I'll give it to him the next time I see him. And in comes Jesus to her town, being honored at a dinner, possibly one she's not even invited to because possibly her past cannot be overlooked by anyone else there. And she says, I don't care about what anybody else thinks. And she crashes the party, not to do something stupid, at least not in Jesus' eyes. She crashes the party to sacrifice to Jesus what was most precious and valuable to her. Listen, this commentary writer explains why he thinks this is going through Mary's mind. He says, if you show up at the crucifixion scene, you'll find other Marys. You'll find Mary, the mother of Jesus, but you won't find this Mary. If you go to the tomb, you'll find other Marys. You'll find Mary, the mother of James and John. You'll find Mary Magdalene. You'll find other Marys when it comes to the end of the life of Jesus. But you don't find this Mary at any of those locations. Why? She clearly cared for Jesus above what most people did. Why was she not there? Because she knew Jesus wouldn't be there. You with me? She knew that death couldn't hold him. She knew he would be resurrected. She already lived on resurrection ground. Friends, let that settle in for just a moment. Do we worship like Mary? Man, that's my goal. That's my hope. I want to worship like Mary. Listen, good examples produce good lessons. I want to work like Martha. I want to worship like Mary. Can I show you one more example, though, for us to look at as we follow Jesus? Example number 3, witness like Lazarus. Witness like Lazarus. Okay, we've encountered Martha. She's serving. We want to work like her. She's always serving Jesus. Okay, we've encountered Mary. She's giving of all that she has. She is always at the feet of Jesus. I want to be like that. I want to worship like Mary. But what about Lazarus who's sitting at the table? Whatever happened to him? Look at verse 9 of John chapter 12. When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but look at this, not only on account of Jesus, but also to see, there he is, Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, right? The same way as on account of Jesus, on account of Lazarus, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. Friends, this is one of my most favorite moments in the Bible. People wanted to see Jesus, as we hope people always will. But notice what John writes, not only on account of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus. Why? Why would they want to see Lazarus when they could see Jesus? Because on account of Lazarus, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. Listen, this moment reminds me of a couple of things about our witness. You ready? Our witness has the potential to bring salvation. Now listen, we don't save anybody. Please don't take that. Jesus alone has the power to save. But my witness to Jesus can point somebody to salvation in Jesus. Our witness has the potential, just like Lazarus, to bring salvation. The witness of Lazarus, the testimony of what Jesus did in his life, was causing people to believe in Jesus. Now I want you to notice something. No one cared about Lazarus before this moment. Nobody. They didn't want to see Lazarus because Jesus visited his house. They didn't want to see him because they knew that he was friends with Jesus. They didn't care about Lazarus until Jesus gave him new life. That's when they wanted to see Lazarus. Friends, we're no different than Lazarus. He was raised from the dead, and so are we. Listen to this from Ephesians chapter 2. But God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved and raised up with him. We've been given new life just like Lazarus. But how many people are believing in Jesus because of my life? On account of me, have people started following Christ? Our witness has the potential to bring salvation. I'm reminded of something else, though, with Lazarus. It's a little bit more intimidating. Our witness also has the potential to bring suffering. Jesus' location in this moment is known. They are on their way to arrest him and to kill him, but also not just Jesus. The chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well. Listen, I read from a commentary this past week. I thought it was really interesting. You don't see the names Martha, Mary, and Lazarus very often in the other gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You don't find it very often. In fact, you don't find the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Most scholars believe that they weren't mentioned by name because their lives would be in jeopardy if their names were mentioned. But John writes so much later that this family is already dead. And so they're not at risk anymore of their lives being in jeopardy. But because of the witness of Lazarus' life, he too would suffer like Jesus. Friends, that could also be our case as we become a witness for Christ. In fact, according to Matthew's account and Mark's account, it's after this moment that Judas went to the religious leaders and agreed to betray Jesus. I'm not saying it'll be easy to be a witness for Jesus, but I am saying that because of your testimony for Christ, your life and the lives of others can be changed. Friends, that's what I want. I don't know about you today, but listen, I can't think of any better examples than what we read about here in John chapter 12. I don't know about you, but I want to follow Jesus. Like, yeah, when it comes to basketball, Michael Jordan's awesome. But when it comes to Christianity, there is none better than Jesus. I want to be like him. You say, Danny, how? I want to work like Martha. I want to serve Jesus as often as I can. I want to be known for how much I work for Christ. Friend, listen, I want to worship like Mary. I want to be known for being at the feet of Jesus and offering him everything that I have because he's worth it all. Friends, I want to witness like Lazarus. I want people to see my life and I want it to point them to Jesus. Friends, that's what I want. What better examples can we have? Listen, I wonder if you're here today, you say, Danny, man, these moments, these characters, this is awesome. I'll say, yeah, I agree. But I wonder as you think about them, what kind of questions do you have for your own life? Do you work like Martha? You know God's gifted you. Are you serving him? Do you worship like Mary? Do you know you're invited to sit at the feet of Jesus every day? Do you? Who cares what anybody else does? Do you worship Jesus? I wonder if you're a witness like Lazarus. Can you process something for a moment? I'm done, I promise. Can you process this? Lazarus could care less if they killed him. You want to know why? Because he came back from the dead. Like, think about that for a moment. When Jesus raises you from the dead, are you really concerned about what anybody else can do? You with me? Guess what? He has raised you from the dead. Why would we not want to be a witness no matter what to what Jesus has done for us? Of course we should. Well, friend, where are you? Do you want to be like Jesus? If so, will you learn some good lessons from some good examples? If so, how is the Lord challenging you to be more like Christ today? Listen, I'm going to pray. I'm going to go back to that lobby. If you're here and you say, Danny, I need some prayer over some things that the Lord's convicting me of, listen, you walk back to that lobby. You come find me. I'd love to pray with you. You say, Danny, I'm here, and man, Mary's worship of Jesus, I don't even know what that's like. What do I need to do? Am I even a follower? Do I even know Jesus? Do I want to sacrifice all to him? Hey, friend, listen, if you aren't a follower of Jesus, you come find me in that lobby. I will help you understand why it's the best decision you will ever make.